This is a quick introduction to starting your first podcast, and in this I'm going to talk about things that worked for me, but there are a multitude of different tools and different approaches. All of them are valid and all of them are as good as each other. Some of the ones that I don't use are better than the ones that I use. My advice would be to try as many approaches as you can, and definitely don't take what I say to be gospel. The more you practice and experiment with a whole range of tools before starting your podcast, the better your final results are going to be when you do actually start to work properly on your first podcast. It's like everything, isn't it? You know, the more you practice and the more you experiment, the better the results get as you go along. There are 3 things that are essential for creating your own podcast. The first one is a method of capturing sound digitally. And for the purposes of this introduction, I'm going to presume that it's your voice and possibly somebody else's voice that you want to capture digitally. The second thing that you need is a means of editing that sound, usually a thing called a DAW, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation. A DAW is to sound as Microsoft Word is to language. It's a way of editing, moving, and presenting audio in a form that you think communicates your message best. And that's what we're going to use. We're going to use a DAW to edit the sound. The third and final thing that's essential for getting your first podcast up and going is a hosting platform for your podcast. Somewhere you can upload your audio and then listeners can either stream it from there or they can download it directly to their devices. So that's 3 things that we need. A method of capturing sound digitally, a means of editing that sound, and a platform that hosts that audio. I'm going to introduce you to some basic tools that fit into those 3 categories, and I'm purposely going to focus on free and basic tools just to get us started, but I will also mention some more sophisticated versions of those tools that you might want to investigate once you have a few podcasts under your belt and if you want to take things a little bit further. Don't get distracted by fancy equipment like I often do. That locker behind me is full of microphones that I very rarely use, and this microphone. There are too many microphones in the world. Don't let them distract you. You know, as you start, focus on the basics. And truth be told, you probably have everything you need to make a decent podcast already. You probably have all the tools that we need. But let's talk about the first one, a method of capturing sound digitally. The voice recorder on your smartphone is a really good place to start. And you've probably seen it on the news and seen it in broadcasts already, that for radio stations and for news, people are using their phones to record audio digitally that is broadcast quality. You'll often see people holding their phone up at a press conference, or if a politician comes out, if they doorstep somebody. Just be careful that you don't hold the phone too close to whoever's talking. The microphone on an iPhone, and I'm going to reference an iPhone a lot because it's the one that I use, is on the bottom. So when you're talking into the iPhone, you kind of hold it upside down and you talk into the bottom of it and then you point that towards the other person. If the phone is too close to you or to the person who's talking, there's a chance that it might distort and it will, what's called clipping in terms of audio. Be careful of that. Practice with it. You know, read something, read pages from a book and record your voice and listen back to it and figure out a position that's good for recording your own voice and then apply that to whoever you're recording as well. Use the same distance. And once you've mastered recording clear audio on your phone, then go interview somebody in your house. I set students an assignment to go and create their own podcast as part of a recording techniques module. And one of the most engaging results was somebody interviewing their own family about their love of music and the influence music has had on their lives. And the interesting thing about that is that even if you don't ever publish these interviews or even publish a podcast, having interviews of your own family members can be a really nice thing to have, a recording of your loved ones. And it's surprising the things that family members will tell you in an interview that they've never told you before. And that can be a really nice document to have. And it's also good practice. Don't worry about mistakes when you go through recording this stuff. If the dog barks, we can edit things like that out once we start editing the audio. If you make a mistake while recording the audio, let the recording run. Don't stop it. Compose yourself. Take a breath, relax, and then try to say that sentence again, and we can edit out the mistakes. That's what the DAW is for, the Digital Audio Workstation. We can edit out the stuff we don't want. Once you do have an interview that you're happy with, record it onto your phone, email it to yourself, or share it any way you can onto your computer so we can get it from the phone onto your computer and we can start to edit it. Some computers have built-in microphones, the same thing that you might have been using recently for Zoom meetings. And we can use these microphones that are built into the computer to also record interviews and record straight into the DAW that we're going to use. You might also have a microphone as part of the headset for your phone. I have one here. These ones are from my iPhone, so you can see there, that's the microphone that's on that. That'll work as well. That's a good way of capturing your own voice. Not great for capturing other people, but if it's just you talking on the podcast to begin with, that'll work. Some people might have a handheld digital recording device like this one that I have. This is the one that I use when I'm going out mobile on the road. There are lots and lots of different versions of these, small ones, big ones, but all of them just record audio digitally, and then we get it from this device onto the computer. That's what we're trying to do. If you have been using Zoom for meetings and chats, this can be a really easy way to capture audio, and not just capture yourself talking, but to capture somebody else as well, multiple people. And there's a record button on Zoom. You have to make sure that it's you that's hosting the meeting. And once it is, there's a record button available. And if you hit that record button, it will record an audio version of the conversations that you have. And once you finish the meeting, you'll get sent a file, an audio file from Zoom, and this audio file can then form the basis of your podcast. We can edit that. Just a little note on audio formats here before we get stuck into this other stuff. With Zoom and with the memo recorder on an iPhone, the format that you record in is a thing called M4A. And that's not compatible with the DAW that we're going to use. But there is something that will convert that M4A file into what we want, which is a WAV file. And I'll show that to you now. This is a website called Zamar.com. And Zamar will convert any type of a file to a WAV file. And I have one that I prepared earlier. So this is my Zoom meetings. Zoom creates a folder in documents, and in here it will upload the audio files to this. And here's the most recent one here. And if I click on this, this is the M4A file. So this is the audio file. And what I do is drop that M4A file into Zamar, then select WAV. That's what I want to change it to. You can select a lot of different formats here. I'm going to select WAV and click on Convert Now. And what it does is it automatically creates this file, and then you can download that file directly to your computer. And save that. Click OK. And then when I check in downloads, here's that WAV file that I've just converted from M4A to WAV. And that's the format that's preferable to use with their DAW. There's another online service if you want audio that's slightly better than that you'll get from Zoom. One that I've used myself on my own podcast called Zencastr. And this is the website here. So it's zencastr.com. And the beauty of Zencastr is that it captures audio locally on your computer, but then it captures audio locally on whoever you're talking to as well. You set it up like a Zoom meeting, you send somebody a link, and it captures the audio directly onto their computer that they create, and it captures the audio that you create directly onto your computer, and then it merges the two files. So the quality is a good bit better than Zoom, and it is free to begin with. That there is free, and you can see here that they're helping out during these times, that you can log on and you can use that to create an account for free. There is a version where you pay and the audio is slightly better, but I've used the free version and it's absolutely fine for purposes of creating a spoken word podcast. When you're getting the hang of how all these tools work, I wouldn't get too hung up on the fidelity of the audio. Practice with as many tools as possible and compare the audio from each of them. When you're about to record your first real interview, when you're really getting the hang of this, use whatever sounds best from your practice runs. And I think that's a good way to go. The second essential item that we need to create our podcast is that digital audio workstation. And there's a whole range of these DAWs for editing audio. Pro Tools, Logic, Reaper, Adobe Audition are some of the high-end tools, but Audacity is free and powerful, and it runs on Mac and PC. And even with all of those tools, those high-end tools, I find myself using Audacity all the time. The place to go to get Audacity is this website, and it's www.audacityteam.org. And down here you can select to download Audacity, and it will ask you what is your operating system, and choose the best version of Audacity for whatever operating system you're running. This is what Audacity looks like, and I'm not going to turn this into an Audacity tutorial. There are plenty of online resources for that, but what I will say is making sure that your audio tracks are mixed and as clear as possible and as loud as possible without distorting or clipping is a good habit to get into. Key to that is using a thing called audio compression on your recordings. Compression gives you a consistency of loudness, reducing the dynamic, but it means you can make your recordings loud and clear. And the reason for that is that if somebody listens to a podcast before yours, you want your podcast to be as loud as that last one and as loud as the next one. Because if your podcast sounds a little bit weak or the audio isn't clear, there is a chance that people mightn't return and listen to your podcast. For more information on compression in Audacity, seek out the compressor and equalization video that's on the How to Make Podcasts channel on YouTube. So Audacity compressor and equalization on the How to Make Podcasts channel, and that will give you some really good information on compression and how to use it. Audacity is a very powerful and easy to use tool. Once we have our WAV file, it's just a case of dragging and dropping it into the Audacity editor, and then it becomes available for us to edit. We can delete out bits that we don't need at the start, delete out bits that we don't need at the end. And as I said, this isn't an Audacity tutorial. There's lots of resources online, and getting up to speed on Audacity is probably good. But very quickly, I'll go into Effect, I'll go to Compressor, and automatically this will compress that to make those loud bits a little bit quieter and make the quieter bits very much louder, reducing some of the dynamic range. So that's one element of audio that we've completed here. You can also drag in other audio files. Let's drag in this one down here. And you can mix your audio files then, zoom in, fade between them, layer them, and move them around in relation to each other, and build up multi-track projects. So not just one track, but you can have multi-layered and multi-tracked projects in there. Once you have your editing complete, you're going to bounce out or export your audio. A word here about audio formats and audio quality. For my podcast, I bounce out my files as 320 kbps audio files. That's kilobytes per second. This isn't as good as a CD quality WAV, but the reason I bounce it out as an MP3 file is because that's a smaller file. Poorer quality, but it's a smaller file, and the quality is negligible when you listen to it, especially for spoken word. But the reason that I use the smaller file size is that it uploads quicker to the hosting platform. And as well as uploading quicker, hosting platforms charge you for the space that you use. So the bigger your files, the more space you'll need on the hosting platform, and the more your subscription will be. It costs me about 20 quid a month to use the hosting platform that I use, and by using MP3s I get better value from that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bounce that out as an MP3. So I select export as MP3, and I'll put it on desktop for the moment, and I'll call it podcast test and save. It's telling me that the tracks will be mixed down as one stereo file, and that's ideal. That's what I want. Click OK. And it takes a little bit of time to do that. Once you have exported your audio, we can now upload this file to our hosting platform. The hosting platform is the third essential item that we're going to need to create our podcast. I use a platform called Libsyn, and as I mentioned, I pay about 20 quid for that a month, and I upload my exported audio to this Libsyn platform. Fill in the details that each episode, I provide an image for each one, specify the release date, and then Libsyn will send that audio to Apple Podcasts, to Spotify Podcasts, to all the usual places where people listen to podcasts. Acast, that's another hosting platform that does the exact same thing. David McWilliams' podcast and the Blind Boy podcast, they use Acast. I chose Libsyn as I don't want ads associated with my podcast. My podcast is ad-free, and Libsyn allows me to do that very easily. There are lots and lots of different podcast hosting platforms, Podbean, Buzzsprout. When you get to a level where you want to send your podcast to places to get bigger audiences, as many people as possible, and you're willing to pay for that service, search out a podcast hosting platform that suits what you want to do and pick the one that suits you best and that is most suitable for your budget. For now, I'm going to suggest that we use SoundCloud. SoundCloud offers 180 minutes of audio for free, which means you can get your first podcasts online and start sharing them among family and friends and potential audience without having to pay for the privilege. So soundcloud.com is where you're going to want to go and create an account. It's going to ask you for your details, and you can create that account and then begin uploading your audio. Once you have given it your details, you can click on upload up here on the top toolbar and then just drag your audio file in there. And the audio file that we created is podcasttest.mp3. We drag that in here, and then we add in a title for this, so you'd give your podcast a title. You can upload an image to be associated with your podcast. You can also select whether you want it to be public, so anybody can listen to it on SoundCloud, or if you want it to be private. And if it's private, that means that you can share a link and only have people that you want to listen to the podcast listen to it. You can also add in permissions here, and with permissions, this allows people to either download it directly, listen offline. Also, you can display an embed code, which can be handy if you want to send this to bloggers, or if you want to put it on your own blog, that you can embed this in here with HTML and it will show up on blogs and on text pages. You can also enable comments. There's positives and negatives to that. If you want people to be able to comment on your podcast and display these comments and display stats, up to you. And eventually this will upload. Once the file is uploaded, SoundCloud will create a link for that file. Command-C will copy that link, and you'll be able to paste that link onto social media channels, into emails, to share and bring people to your podcast on SoundCloud. And that's it. Once you've uploaded your file to SoundCloud and it goes live and you share the link, you've joined the ranks of millions of podcasters around the world. A couple of pointers that might prove useful, things that definitely worked for me that might be worth sharing. They mightn't work for you, but still, they may be worth sharing. Being clear and specific about what your podcast is about. This will bring people to it. The Irish History podcast is a very good example of that. Don't be afraid to be extremely narrow in the scope of what your podcast is about. Some of the best podcasts and the most popular podcasts are extremely narrow in that scope. I started the Irish Music Industry podcast 2 years ago to paint as full a picture as possible of what happens in the music sector in Ireland today. I aim that podcast at those hoping to start a career in the music business, or those who already have a career in the music business and are interested in hearing how other professionals go about their work in that sector. I initially thought that having a niche podcast would mean that the listenership numbers would be very low, but that's not the case at all. 2 weeks ago, the Irish Music Industry podcast was number 1 in the music section of the Irish podcast charts. As well as providing a resource for my own students from the BA Music course in WIT, I get messages from lecturers in third level institutions all around the country telling me that the podcast is included in their essential reading materials, in this case listening materials, and I've been invited to colleges and festivals around the country to record the podcast in front of live audiences. So niche and very focused works. One of the really rewarding things about a podcast that deals with a discipline that's relevant to students that I teach is that I'm still interacting with our graduates years after they finish the course. About half a dozen of them sent me messages after publishing this week's episode. It's like providing a form of positive after-sales service that still deals with the topics that we talked about in college. If you do establish a regular podcast, consistency is key. Publish your podcast to a regular pattern so listeners are able to get into the habit of knowing when it's available, and by doing that it becomes part of their weekly routine, and that can be really advantageous. Choose your guests carefully. Talk podcasts rely on engaging guests and chat. Don't forget that or lose sight of it. Plan your episodes. Have a few recorded before you release your first one. Definitely don't just release the first one as soon as you have it finished. Try to plan it out, hone your skills, and let that first one be a really strong episode, because you want it to bring people back. So lead with the strongest one that you have. Outside all of that, have fun, good luck, and mind yourself. All the best.